Interesting fight coming up this weekend. We have middleweight prospects looking to tango and originally scheduled to be between Josh Fremd of LFA fame taking on Tresean Gore, but back in the middle to the later stages of May 17th, it was announced that Fremd was out and in steps Cody Brundage, so realistically a full training camp to get ready for Tresean Gore.
Did we get a better fight though?
Yeah, I think we did.
So do I.
I think we did. And for Cody Brundage, an interesting guy so far in this UFC's middleweight division, because in his debut, he took on Nick Maximov. You can make an argument either way, but regardless, Maximov out on the winning end. It was just chain, the takedown for Maximov. Brundage doing a little bit with the hands and a little bit with his own takedowns. But regardless, his last time out against Dalcha Lungiambula, one of the most interesting fights I've seen in 2022, and arguably the biggest comeback of the year in that fight. And I'll touch on that quite a bit, because if you look at it, I mean, in terms of total strikes in that fight, 50-15. Like, it's just absolutely wild to see it. But for Cody Brundage, I mean, dropped. Lungiambula was all over him, and realistically, even before that, Brundage was able to work in his takedown, which is crazy to see against the judo man himself out of Africa in Dalcha Champ. But realistically, what happened was Dalcha just poured it on. He was throwing uppercuts in the clinch, he was throwing hooks, he was throwing shots on the ground, and ultimately Brundage goes for broke and goes for the tightest guillotine he could, and it ended up that he submitted Dalcha Lungiambula. So a wild win. I'm going to show you what the commission member looked like after that fight, because he was absolutely flabbergasted and couldn't believe that Brundage was able to win a performance bonus for Brundage in that fight. But we do look at it overall for Brundage. He was up against William Knight on Dana White's Contender Series a few years ago. He was winning that fight with his wrestling.
Was he beating me?
Until William Knight, in one of those wrestling exchanges, just decided, I'm going to finish this fight. But for Brundage, I mean, that's the thing. Wrestling base at the core. And I should make a correction, because I will talk about 50-15 total strikes in round number 1. That was battle against Gore. But if you do look at it, 29-4, the total strikes, Lungiambula to Brundage in the first round of their fight. But Matt, I know we talked a lot about Cody Brundage getting ready for the Maximov fight, getting ready for the fight against Dalcha Lungiambula. Brad gets sputtered with the wrestling, and he will chain his own takedowns together. He does great work up against the fence. Pretty, rudimentary when it comes to his striking. He's got a good leg kick.
Basic but effective.
Yeah, he's got a good 1-2, but a little bit of pop at the end of his shots. But he's always in the pocket, ready to throw down, and he's always bringing the fight to his opponent.
And that's going to be the real key in this fight. It's going to be, how aggressive is Cody Brundage against a guy like Tresean Gore? Because if he is really lax, let's say Cody's on the back foot, and he's not the one going for the kill, it still might help him, to be honest, because what Gore really excels in, he reminds me a little bit of Jermell Charlo from boxing. Charlo doesn't throw a crazy amount of output. He'll wait for the perfect shot, and sometimes he'll be criticized for being a little bit boring in his fights, but when he lands that perfect shot, you see what happens. He knocked out Danny Castillo, it was crazy. For Tresean Gore, I feel like he can fall into that rhythm sometimes too. He understands, hey, I have incredible hand speed, and boy does he ever. Like, when he lets his hands go, they are as speedy as it gets. But the problem is, he does wait for that perfect shot a little bit too much, and I think against a guy like Cody Brundage, who normally is the one trying to force the action moving forward, I think that could get Brundage caught if he's not intelligent about shooting for his own takedowns. Because if he is trying to play around with Tresean Gore on the feet, let's say he's trying to pitter-patter a little too much with his own volume, I think that's when Gore could duck a jab, land his own right hand, land a big technique on the feet, because that's what Gore's going to have to do. He's going to have to rely on his hand speed, and I would say his above-average power, especially in this matchup against Brundage. But again, though, I do worry about the fighter that we saw in that Bryan Battle matchup. What if Gore is just sort of on the back foot the whole time? What if he finds himself defending takedowns and not just the attempts? Because that's the problem with Gore. There's a lot of fighters who have great takedown defense to where, okay, it's really hard to get them down on the mat. There's a second portion of takedown defense, though, and it's kind of clinch control. How many fighters do we see defend the first 3 or 4 takedowns and then just get held against the cage for a minute, 2 minutes? That's something Gore's going to have to get out of if he wants to be successful at this level.
Well, and folks were really hard on me coming out of the season of The Ultimate Fighter, because you had Bryan Battle taking on Gilbert Urbina. Obviously, it was supposed to be Tresean Gore, but he had a knee injury, so he had to go to the sidelines. Urbina gets knocked out by Gore to then take on Battle, and Urbina beats Battle in the first round of that fight, and then Battle storms back and finishes Urbina in the second round. So they make the Ultimate Fighter finale that was supposed to happen on the actual season. They made that this year, and that was about 4 months ago, almost 5 months ago, between Battle and Gore. So where people were really hard on me was the fact that I wasn't as hyped up about Tresean Gore as a lot of people when we made that video. I had Battle to get the win, and if you look at it for Tresean Gore on season 29 of The Ultimate Fighter, he was one of those guys that was favored to win the entire thing, even having a limited pro career. I mean, I have it up on the screen that he's 3-1. The UFC is going to show you 4-1 because they count 3-round exhibition fights on The Ultimate Fighter as real fights. The 2-round fights they don't, but the 3-round fights they do. So that's why I have it as 3-1. But if you look at it for Tresean Gore on The Ultimate Fighter, he's Team Ortega. Tiki Gosen is one of the main coaches and corners on that team. And in every single fight that Tresean Gore was on The Ultimate Fighter, Tiki Gosen pulled the Saif Saud and he had to yell Tresean Gore into doing things. And once Tiki got loud enough, you could see Tresean going, okay, yeah, I need to pick this shot. I need to go for this wrestling attempt. I need to do this. And when you go and you watch his UFC debut, no Tiki Gosen, back to his regular camp, and it was just, it's that Keith Richards rip from Start Me Up. We just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And even Tresean, by the end of that fight against Battle, was just kind of frustrated with himself that there wasn't much action going on. But for Gore, he was getting tied up against the cage. He was getting the takedown attempts against him. He had success against Battle in the second round for sure. I mean, again, Battle went 50-15 in terms of significant strikes in the first round. The second round, Tresean Gore rallied back. The third round, Battle just kind of held on for dear life. It wasn't the best fight I've ever seen, but for Gore, I know the speed's there. I know the power's there. I know the wrestling's there. They all got to go into combination. I got to see it in the octagon.
I agree with everything you said, but the only slight zag is, I think Tiki just yells a lot. Like, Tiki and most guys, again, when Rampage used to fight, you could only hear Tiki, like, scream like he was Eddie Alvarez's wife. So, I do think that's just more the coach than anything, but it does seem to be an issue for Tresean Gore. It's just a matter of getting started in MMA, and this is a common problem for a lot of MMA fighters. Like, Forrest Griffin, I remember, got a UFC title, but he was a really slow starter in his fights. He'd almost have to get dropped or wobbled or really hurt, and then the fight would begin. We see this with a lot of different fighters. Now, you hope it doesn't have to get to that point where it's like, okay, you have to take real damage before it can initiate you, but for Gore, he's going to have to get out of that slow start again if he wants to have success at this level. And against Cody Brundage, who again, he's 1-1 in the UFC, but he fought Nick Maximov, who might be boring, but he's still a talented fighter, and Dolce Lungiambula, who's extremely experienced across multiple different weight classes.
And was beating the piss out of Cody Brundage before the tight guillotine, like beating the brakes off him.
My whole point, though, is he's 1-1 against way better fighters than Tresean Gore's ever even come close to. Like, Brian Battle's a talented fighter, but he's still extremely unproven. And for Gore, I think this fight against Brundage is going to be a big step up, even if it's only a perceived step up in competition, because I do think Brundage is a much more well-rounded mixed martial artist than what Tresean Gore is. And unless Gore can defend a lot of the takedown attempts early, uses low volume as a benefit to where, okay, maybe Gore, you're not winning the first round based off your volume, based off your hand speed, but you still have enough left in the tank to where if Brundage does get tired as this fight progresses, then maybe Gore could land a really big counter shot. I just think he's really going to struggle with Cody Brundage's ability to mix it up with his wrestling and with his striking. I think that's going to be one of those skill checks that Tresean Gore has to get past, almost like Greg Hardy when he fought Yorgan Castro and got leg kicked a lot before Yorgan broke his foot. Like, there's some of these skill checks that everyone needs to pass before they can get to a title shot or get into the rankings. And for Gore, he has to be able to figure out the wrestle boxer. Now, this fight against Cody Brundage will be a very good opportunity for him to do so. I just think stylistically, this is a very poor style for Tresean Gore to deal with.
I mean, at this point, what the fuck do you do with a guy that's 3-1 in the fucking UFC in 2022? Like, there's very limited matchups.
Alex Pereira straight up knocked out 3 people.
But Alex Pereira had glory kickboxing lineage. But when you look at a guy like Tresean Gore, 3-1 in MMA or 4-1 as the UFC will say, it just really is hard to make some of these matchups. And you look at the odds, they've actually shifted. Brundage open as a slight favorite, -115, -107 right now. For Tresean Gore, open -105, -115 or thereabouts. So we have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us as they are to you, but I'm going to say over under 65% Tresean Gore.
I'll say under.
And they're close. 591 total votes. 52% Brundage, 66% by decision, 27% by submission. For the 48% that have Gore, 25% by decision, 68% by knockout. So slim margin have Brundage to win. The odds have shifted towards Tresean Gore. Who do you see winning this fight?
Experience really does matter. Like, speed and experience are probably the two most important things in MMA. If I can hit you and you can't hit me, then I'm going to beat you every single time, no matter how hard either one of us hit. And experience means I've seen a lot of different looks from my opponents, and now I have a better understanding of them. I really do think that if Brundage gets Gore into some of those uncomfortable positions, Gore doesn't have the experience to fight his way out of those positions, and that's why I think he's going to struggle. Again, Gore could look really good in this matchup, matchup, and it would make me change my opinion of him in the future. But until I see him beat a guy like Cody Brundage, I'm going to have to predict against him. Now, I might look very stupid as a result of that, but I really do think Brundage's steadiness in this fight and his ability to mix in his own takedown is going to be really tough for Tresean Gore to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, Brundage got completely, nearly finished in his last fight. 29-4, again, the total strikes. But he did earn a takedown against Lungiambula early in that fight, and then to end that fight, he had that really tight guillotine. Again, that win definitely does matter, but to me, it's the win that Brundage has coming into the UFC, before the UFC with LFA, over Joseph Cropshot, a guy who was accredited on the ground, and Brundage was really able to get it done in that fight as well. So both of us going with Factory X's own Brundage to get the win in this one. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. And we have some big time fights later on in this card. I mean, the co-main event in this division, couple of prospects once again. We have Caio Borralho taking on Armand Petrosian, and then you look at the main event, RDA taking on Fiziev, the former lightweight champ, the future lightweight champ, question mark. Some big time fights. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.